Hi everyone. I want to talk today about a modern classic Taiwanese LGBT plus novel, Notes of a Crocodile by Miaojin. This book was originally published in 1994 in Taiwan and then translated into this English version in 2017 by Huie, who I think actually won an award for this translation. I listened to the audiobook version narrated by Joe May. I learned about this book from Seiji on the channel The Artisan Geek, which I absolutely love. She actually chose it for her monthly book club in June, and I picked it up because something about it just really grabbed my attention as soon as I saw the description. I'm actually going to link a video of hers below about LGBT plus classics in general, in which she talks about this book as well as some other recommendations. The novel is about a Taiwanese girl, or really rather a young woman, written as sort of a series of personal journals. I think it's grouped into either 7 or 8 notebooks that roughly represent different semesters at the university in Taiwan. Covering this college environment and experience, it's been called a coming of age novel, and for what that's worth, it's certainly an apt description. I'll refer here to the main character simply as the narrator because her true name is never revealed. One of the other characters nicknames her Latsi about halfway through the novel, but by that point it was too late for me to think of her as anything but the nameless narrator, just as the author probably intended. It's about her struggles in figuring out who she is, both in terms of how she fits into the world as a whole and in how her sexuality fits into all of this, since she is pretty exclusively or predominantly attracted to women. It's about the various friends, romantic partners, and acquaintances, many of whom fit into more than one of these categories depending on the time, who entered into her life at the university and she sees as having influenced her. The tone is also highly depressive, brooding, and even suicidal at times. Often the narrator and her friends make these quite dark jokes or comments that establish their characters and feel extremely real. And throughout reading this, I was acutely aware that the author herself died by suicide at the age of 26, and only roughly a year after the book was published in Taiwan. Still, although the characters struggle sometimes enormously, it's also about the ways they find to get by, some more effectively than others. I imagine you could still do a lot worse in terms of depressing novels. The narration was excellent, although I always try to be aware when listening to fiction that the narrator gives the text a meaning beyond what's actually written there on the page. Here, narrator Joe may have shaped my view of the characters a bit because she really voiced each character in a way that made certain ones often feel more tender, while others more callous. And this all felt natural with what was being said, so I thought it was great, but I also just want to be conscious that the experience would have been different reading it from straight text. So what did I think? Well, I really liked this book. In fact, it's been one of my favorites of the year so far. I hadn't been feeling too much deep emotion at the time I read it, yet this book managed to really cut through and move me. There's a lot to be said about this book, and frankly a lot that I can't say because there simply isn't enough time. I feel like if you talked about the book with a bunch of different people, you'd end up touching on totally different aspects in each conversation. Now, I'm not really going to give spoilers in this book because this book isn't a very plot-driven book. It certainly would fall within the literary fiction classification, but since the character personalities are so crucial, and since many of their actions are ambiguous or could be interpreted in many different lights, although it's not a spoiler in any true sense, anything I say may prime you to perceive the characters in a certain way. So if you're interested, totally wouldn't mind if you just go and check out the book first, and then see if the rest of what I have to say here rings true for you. Let's talk for a second about the setting, though. The book for me conveyed a certain gloomy, grungy aesthetic, although I can't say for sure how much of this was the author's doing versus my own invention, because I wasn't thinking specifically about that while reading. I'm sure it also helped that I listened to most of this book while running or walking outside on some cool and cloudy mornings. But anyway, to get more specific, the book was set in post-martial law Taiwan. I didn't know what this meant when I picked up the book, so if you've been watching my channel for a while, you probably won't be surprised to hear that I did a little bit of Wikipedia browsing and looked up some YouTube videos to learn what this meant. And I have to admit, I still only have a pretty limited understanding, but after separation from the official government of China for 38 years, a period of pretty strict authoritarian rule, President Chiang Ching-kuo in 1987 basically said enough is enough of this. As a result, there began a period of increased cultural openness in Taiwan, including exposure to film and literature. And we see this in a lot of the narrator's reflections, which often refer to specific film, literature, and songs, some of which English-speaking readers will recognize. The book isn't strictly about that. It's more just part of the setting. So if you want to learn more about it, search YouTube for the history of Taiwan or look up the Wikipedia article on martial law in Taiwan, it's called, for more info. In any case, my still limited knowledge of this period means that much of the context of this book was lost on me. Not that I thought this was essential for appreciating or understanding it, but you know what I mean. It also means that I can't fully appreciate the context of what it was like to be LGBT in this time and place, although many of these experiences seemed like ones that will resonate with people all around the world, even today. Okay, so let's jump over to that for a second. This is unquestionably an LGBT plus novel, not in sort of like a side aspect, but as a main theme of the novel. Perhaps some would say the main theme. We see characters who we understand are the people they are and have many of their flaws and strengths, but precisely because of their sexuality that oppose the norms of the time and place. And it's not just one LGBT plus character in this novel, but a whole group of them. They share common struggles, but are not by any means the same person. This aspect of their identity, though, feels like a shared thing, or in some cases a shared suffering that inherently binds them together. And yet also, while the relationships and growth of these characters are uniquely shaped by their LGBT identities, they also feel fundamentally relatable as humans and offer a window into their souls for me, as well as hopefully for many others who don't identify as LGBT. There are also some pretty interesting discussions by characters about feeling pigeonholed into feminine or masculine roles, wanting to throw away these labels and even to transcend them completely. Interestingly, they still do seem to cling to gender roles in a way and use them to understand the different aspects of their personality, though they sometimes even realize this themselves and argue that this is merely a result of society's conditioning of them. This novel is also a portrayal of depression, mental health challenges, and thoughts of suicide, and particularly how they affect those in the LGBT community. I find it hard to exactly place my finger on the tone of this book because from everything I've said about it thus far, it would seem like it's just incredibly depressing. Yet there is maybe some underlying feeling of, well, at least getting by. Most people who have read Miaojin's other book, Last Words from Montmartre, said that one is utterly depressing beyond redemption in a way that makes this one feel much lighter by comparison. In any case, it's quite clear while reading this book that the author and the characters have suffered from depression. I'm not sure I would go as far as to recommend against reading it if you're prone to depression yourself. I've dealt with my fair share of depression, but I found this more of a depressed novel than a depressing novel. Just as talking with a friend who's going through a rough time at the same time you are, it gave me more of a feeling of solidarity than one of weighing me down. And the narrator, although going through quite a rough time and for quite a long period, doesn't go as far as to constantly question whether life is worth living or to try to convince the reader that life is inherently awful. So just consider all of this when judging whether you're in the right mental space to read something like this, but you might actually find it more valuable than you'd first think. There's plenty of discussion of love and relationships too in the novel, which, well, it was complicated and frankly felt genuine because the way the narrator describes love makes us question whether what she's describing is love in its truest sense or something more sinister. When she describes her infatuation with her classmate and senior, Shui Ling, she uses this rapturous language that paints this woman almost as a goddess. To me, it felt totally over the top, and yet, precisely because of this contrast with the voice in the rest of the novel, it conveyed the narrator's helpless obsession perfectly. Yet the way the narrator relates to this woman is frankly emotionally abusive, and she basically perceives everything this woman does as a trick meant to ensnare her and play with her feelings. I could see this dynamic right from the start, and it was fascinating because the way Shui Ling's actions were described made it seem to me like, if anything, Shui Ling is the victim, and the narrator is acting precisely in the manipulative way that she's accusing Shui Ling of acting. It feels like Shui Ling is a pretty normal person, and all the color and malice that the narrator adds to this character is her own projection and her own delusion. Despite all this, though, and the narrator is far from the only emotionally abusive character in this novel, to the author's great credit, I didn't often find myself judging them. We see her interacting with other characters in the erratic way she does, behaving in ways I'd be ashamed to behave myself, at least without very extenuating circumstances. And yet, before long, it feels almost totally natural to us that she and others would behave this way. It feels very much like a defense mechanism, a way to avoid opening up too much to a world that at least she believes has disappointed her and hurt her time and time again. In fact, you could think of this behavior as a thick-skinnedness, almost like a crocodile. So that's actually an excellent transition point for talking about the crocodile interludes. I mean, the book is called Notes of Crocodile, after all. Throughout the book, there are these parts where the serious and brooding atmosphere of the narrative abruptly transitions for short segments to these amusing stories about crocodiles, a seldom seen and highly misunderstood species in Taiwanese society that are said to be facing extinction. The crocodiles normally blend in perfectly with the rest of society, even though they obviously are really monsters. They wear human suits so that they won't be recognized in public, because what would people think if they came across a crocodile at the store? It quickly becomes clear that the experience of the crocodiles is meant to represent, among other things, the experience of being gay in Taiwan at this period in time. Some people on Goodreads and from another review on YouTube that I watched said that the crocodile episodes didn't work for them because they felt too out of place within the context of this novel, but personally, I really liked them. I won't give away the details of these episodes because they can be a lot of fun to experience yourself, but I thought they worked excellently and may have been exactly the thing that lightened this book's depressing tone just enough. In the same way that the narrator and her friends crack jokes about death and other morbid things, it just feels right to me that interspersed with these deeply emotional and outright painful other accounts in the novel, we get the occasional lighthearted story of crocodiles trying to blend in with the humans while figuring out if there are any other crocodiles like them out there. It felt to me like a way of using humor to cover up the darker and more uncomfortable truths that the narrator is facing, which frankly is absolutely perfect because that's what I interpreted the whole crocodile metaphor itself to be about. As a sort of side note, this portrayal of the crocodile has further parallels with the emerging awareness of same-sex relationships in Taiwan at the time, which is described further and better in an article from the LA Review of Books that I'm linking in my description in case you're curious. While I was unable to fully grasp these parallels myself, this review suggests that the way the author portrays the public's widespread but secretive and somewhat disgusted interest with crocodiles is totally similar to the precise manner in which homosexuality became more discussed in the mainstream of Taiwanese society at the time this book is set. I highly encourage you to check out that short review article if this interests you. I also interpreted the crocodile, though, to have a meaning that's slightly alluded to in one of the film references earlier on in the novel. Crocodiles are tough-skinned. They're also seen as having a reptilian coldness. In describing herself and her other queer friends as crocodiles, I think she's trying to get at this point that in their efforts to hide their true feelings and their sexual identities from the rest of the world, they also end up hiding their feelings, even from those around them, those who could potentially care the most, and therefore this crocodilian identity becomes an identity in itself. The tendency to put on a veneer of coldness or toughness because others just wouldn't understand, or just because it's too risky to cast off one's human suit and just be vulnerable. And this was something I could relate to in my own way, even outside of the LGBT context, as someone who's not exactly the best at expressing my emotions or even acknowledging them to myself at times. There are quite a few interesting characters in this novel, but to me the narrator was far and away the one that felt the realist. Her emotional state makes her feel inherently unreliable to us readers, especially when she's describing the other characters' personalities. The more emotionally involved she is with another character, the more we have to doubt her objectivity. And for this reason, I felt I actually learned very little about most of the other characters, especially her lover, Shui Ling. They felt more like a lens for us to learn about the narrator through the way that she sees and describes these people. And yet the narrator doesn't seem like totally delusional or anything like that. Especially when she reports her feelings to us, we understand that these are her feelings. This is the way she's processing things. It's not like she's trying to trick the readers or trying to lie to herself, even if she makes mistakes in her judgments about others or about herself. And for the same reason, it's a bit ambiguous to me how things end up at the end of the book. The narrator presents these experiences to us as sort of formative experiences that have shaped her and that she's learned from in the typical coming-of-age fashion. She speaks candidly at some point about how a fear of connecting with others leads her to push them away before they can push her away, which will have been evident to the readers probably much earlier. We see that she truly believes that she's learned something, and we feel hopeful for her. Yet the way she's acting in the final chapters doesn't seem to me to reveal a fundamentally more mature character in this sense. To me, they suggest someone who's still deeply struggling, who's getting by but having a hard time figuring out how to trust others, and who still doesn't fully understand herself. So why is this novel so memorable to me despite its absence of any real plot and this open question of whether the narrator has really grown or learned a thing about herself in her years at the university? The characters and many passages or things that they say are pretty challenging to decipher to see what they really mean, and the subtlety here is something that I personally always really enjoy. I like it when the writer makes me think for myself. This book is challenging but in a very real way rather than one that feels pretentious or overly ambitious to me. While it often felt like it was going into a stream of consciousness or just flitting from one idea to the next, that just felt because it's how the narrator thinks. It never once felt to me like it was trying to be overly artistic or do something weird just for the sake of being weird. It just felt like a person reflecting on experiences and relationships and frankly still trying to make sense of them. Even if not all the stuff the characters say spoke to me, I suspect that almost every passage in this novel will at least resonate deeply with someone out there. because there were enough of them that were complicated and felt kind of esoteric, but really did resonate with me. Ones that articulated feelings about college or growing up or learning about my emotions and mental health, or learning how people related to me and each other. I also felt this book represented experiences of being a young gay person in a unique way that really built empathy for me. Like, not in a way where I feel like I came out learning so much in some factual sense, but in more of a real empathetic experiential sense. Of course, I say this knowing that the book shouldn't be taken to represent the experience for everyone who's gay, or even for all gay college students in post-martial law Taiwan, but it does represent one experience with aspects that others will certainly share. That's a wrap for Notes of a Crocodile. It's not for everyone, but it definitely is a book for me, and will probably be among my favorites of the year. If this piqued your interest, I'd definitely give it a try. It's not too long, and if you've read it yourself and have any thoughts you'd like to share, please do. There aren't a whole lot of YouTube discussions about this book right now, so anything that contributes to the discussion is awesome. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're interested in hearing more reviews about a bunch of eclectic but not totally random topics. Until next time, bye and happy reading.